thanks for checking out my video today. This is video 3 in my GTR build series. Now in video 3 here, I'm going to go over the intake manifold that I had purchased through Greddy. And this manifold is a single throttle body unit. It eliminates the stock individual throttle bodies. And yeah, I wanted to go to an individual throttle body for a few reasons. I won't go over them right now. I think I mentioned them in the video today. But one of the issues with this this intake manifold that's purchased from a Japanese company, obviously, Greddy or Trust, is that it comes with little to no directions. And so I wanted to go over some of the install of this because it's a little bit complicated. And yeah, I documented in my video here of what I did to get around a lot of items that needed to be rerouted to actually make this intake manifold work. So just a bit more about this intake manifold. This is Greddy part number 135-22307, and it is a 90mm internal butterflied throttle body, which is it takes a 100mm tube over top of it, or 100mm coupler. So it maintains the stock balance tube, and the throttle body and the intake manifold setup is compatible with the stock TPS, and it's also compatible with the stock AAC. So it makes relocating those two items very easy. Okay, what I'm working on right now is removing the intake from the RB26 in my 1990 Skyline GTR. The intake on the RB26 is pretty hard to get to as far as like where the fasteners are placed. So let's take a look at some of the spots that are a little bit difficult here. So now, looking at the studs that are remaining here, there's a few issues. This idle air control valve, which sits underneath the plenum, has 3 bolts that go through the bottom of it and end up fastening to the bottom of the plenum. You have to get to these bolts. It's pretty difficult to get to these. So what we're looking at here is 1, 2, 3. Now on my car in particular, if you can see way down here, this bolt down here won't back all the way out because it runs into the oil filter. It does back out enough so that the plenum can get released. However, yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to do an oil change to get it all the way out at the end of the day. Now, there's a few other items that are very difficult to get to. Now, this tube, which supplies vacuum, I believe, to the possibly the master cylinder. But anyway, it's a vacuum tube here. It has, you can see right down here. Oh, a couple of these wires are in the way. You can see right down here, there's a tab on it, and there's a fastener that goes through that and attaches to the bottom of the plenum. That's another important one to get to. These bottom studs on cylinder 5 and 6 are very difficult to get to as well. You'll need a swivel joint is what I used. So get yourself one of these. That's virtually the only way that I was able to get to it. Now, as far as removing the third bank of throttle bodies, if you do decide to take them out, Rather than messing with all the brackets that hold this tube here, I would suggest just double nutting these studs and just pulling the studs out, especially if you're going with another intake plenum. You'll need to do something with those studs anyway because they're a little bit on the long side, especially if you're eliminating those throttle bodies. Now, with the throttle bodies, pretty important thing here. Now, if you decide to keep these individual throttle bodies, do not clean the bores. You can see on these ones in particular that the bores are very clean. Nissan uses I mean, keep in mind this is 30 years ago. Nissan uses a type of kind of an oil resin that helps these throttle bodies seal. Once you clean it out, they're not going to seal anymore, and what happens is you're going to have a high idle. So if you do pull these out and you plan on putting them back in, make sure that you don't clean too much, because you're gonna cause your basically a vacuum leak in the intake tract. So the next thing that we're going to be doing in here is we're going to be cleaning up everything. I'm going to go through all the vacuum hoses and make sure they're all good. This is an opportunity to kind of go through the wiring as well that runs under here. You can see down here this loom split, and you can see all the wires are sticking out. It's a little bit of a mess, so I'm going to fix things like that. And this is a good opportunity if you're doing anything with where the oil filter housing is. This is an opportunity to deal with that, because it is way under here. So a lot of cleaning, and then a new intake manifold going on. Okay, so here we have the AAC valve. It's basically the valve that creates a small leak to control idle conditions. So now this valve comes from over here. Okay, so the valve was on like this, if you can see that. Now it comes off here, and we go over to our plenum here. This is the Greddy plenum with no directions that are useful. And this valve goes on like that, okay, on the bottom of your plenum here. Okay, so that valve now finds its home on the plenum itself. And it comes off of this area right here. Okay, now because there's no directions, I'm now going to have to figure out what I'm doing with this item. I'm pretty sure it just gets eliminated, but we'll have to find a routing for all of those hoses, so stay tuned. Okay, so first I've got a few parts here that have been removed that I'm not going to need anymore. Okay, so the throttle bodies sit over here. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now on this plenum, all this is really for is to equalize the air. It's not an intake manifold. It's more of a air equalization system, for lack of a better term, or plenum, I guess. And so now the throttle bodies sit there. Now if we go over the car itself, so this is normally where the throttle bodies sit, okay, right down here. Now what you need to think about when you're moving all of this around is that a manifold where you would get your vacuum pressure from, a true vacuum that you would use for different accessories, is between the throttle body and the intake valve. So on the RB26, because the throttle body is right here, they're all right here, and the intake valves are actually about 4 inches in from there, they had to come up with something else that would allow for true vacuum to be accessed. So what they did is they created what's called the balance tube, which you can see right here. So it's sort of underneath the wiring for the injectors. So balance tube's right under here. Now the balance tube also has this valve on it, now basically the balance tube is there to create a vacuum source. So now what I've done with it is I used the balance tube, which has to stay in place with the Greddy manifold. I used it for the cold idle valve, which is down here. Okay, the cold idle valve uses vacuum on one side, so I hooked that vacuum line up to the balance tube, and then on the other side that line is routed to before the throttle body. So what would happen is I have to run a line all the way to before my single throttle body, which will just tap into the charge pipe. The balance tube fed a box that was down here. So that is now over here because I took it out. So this box right here, now that box housed the AAC valve, which went right there. The AAC valve is right there, and there's a place for it to bolt up. Now the vent that comes off the AAC valve again has to be routed to before the throttle body, so I'm going to have to run a tube from there to before the throttle body. So the Greddy manifold maintains the AAC valve, but you have to get a little bit creative with the cold start valve, which isn't too much of a problem. Just requires vacuum on one side, and it requires a place for the air to go pre-throttle body. So on a single throttle body setup, that ends up being the charge pipe or somewhere in the intake side. So on my setup in particular, what I'm doing with the balance tube is that one side of the balance tube here is going to be powering my cold start valve. The other part of the balance tube here, because it's a good vacuum source, I'm using it to power my brake booster and my clutch master. And so those are the two spots where I decided to use that vacuum source. Now so now if you decide to use the Greddy manifold, which is very nice, you get 4 additional vacuum sources here. And now that they are on the manifold itself, the intake manifold itself, after the throttle body, they're a true vacuum source for the engine. So you can use these 4 for other things like, you know, for gauges, boost gauges, whatever you need. They can also be used for a good, clean manifold air pressure sensor, so a MAP sensor. And so Greddy supplies you with 4 places to tap in on there. So I don't think I'm going to use all 4, but they are there. So what I would say, if on the RB26, moving to a single throttle body is, I think it's good. The throttle bodies, the individual throttle bodies are temperamental and they tend to leak a little bit. If you clean them, you run into a situation where you have to add back the goop that Nissan added in the factory to make them seal properly. That could be a little bit problematic. So I'm happy to go to the single. Now the other thing that you're going to have to accommodate is the air temperature sensor right there. So now the air temperature sensor is going to have to go again into a bung and on the intake side before the throttle body. So there's quite a few air reference nipples that you're going to have to weld onto your charge pipe before the throttle body, but that's just the way it is. I mean, you can get around it in different ways, but that's the simplest way, is to just weld a few nipples onto the charge pipe and give the car that access. So now just remember too, on the balance tube there's 2 other vacuum ports that you need to take care of. One is on the front side here. Now that one, you can see it. Now on the front side here, I've used that vacuum nipple for the fuel pressure regulator. And there's one on the back. That one I use to go to a boost gauge. So basically on that balance tube, there's 4 ports that you can use. All right, so working away on the GTR here. Finally finished fitting up the Greddy intake manifold. It's quite a lot of work to put in. If you do just decide to go with a Greddy manifold, or really if you decide to go with any single throttle body manifold on the RB26 and you're installing it with the engine in the car, you're gonna have a lot of work on your hands. And getting to those bolts on the runners, wow, quite challenging. So some of these nuts and studs are very hard to get to. So we're looking like way in here, and believe it or not, there's one on the bottom. Now I was able to get to it, but it was a struggle. There's another one there, and again one on the bottom, way down there. And so just a tip, what I ended up using that was the easiest. So what I ended up using that was the easiest was this sort of thing. So a 12 millimeter swivel on an extension, and at times what I had to use was a little piece of tape in there inside to hold the nut, basically so I could feed this in and get it on the stud, because I couldn't even, there's places on there you couldn't even get your hand in. So, which is fine. I mean, it just takes a little bit of ingenuity. The other thing that was very helpful that you might want to pick up before doing this job is this 12 millimeter, but it's like a I don't know what it's called, but it's bent like an L, and this really helps getting in between the runners. And yeah, that's another tool you might want to pick up to do this job. So otherwise, good luck. It is a struggle. So, but once it's in, it looks fantastic. You know, you got to extend all the wires because now you're running those wires where the sensors for the throttle body would have been over here. Now they're way over here. So I had to extend the 2 plugs that you need for the throttle position sensor. So That's pretty important. And there's a lot of moving around of lines, and I didn't find it all that difficult, but it was definitely time consuming. Thanks a lot for checking out my video today. Remember to like my page, subscribe to it, and hit that bell so that you get notifications when I put up a new video. Hope you had a good time watching the video today. We'll see you soon.